Okay, hello, I'm Eva Rovero, founder and executive director of the National Coalition Against Prescription Drug Abuse. I want to welcome you to this edition of our Lived Experience interview series. Today, we thank and welcome Allie, who has a powerful story of recovery from substance use disorder. We're going to explore how her SUD developed, how she turned her life around, and what she's doing now to support others into their recovery. I want to thank NCAPDA's youth ambassadors that include Ankita, Annika, and Sanjana this morning for conducting our interview with Allie. And I want to thank you, Allie, for joining us today. This is a very special opportunity to learn from you and to share with others how they can maybe turn their situations around. I want to encourage all of you to continue watching for a minute after this interview, because we will share some great resources that we encourage you to check out. And with that, please begin our interview, Annika.
Hi. So I guess our first question would be, so just to get to know you and your story a little bit better, what led you to developing a substance use disorder or SUD, and what substances did you have a problem with?
Great question. There's a couple of factors that led into having, what we like to call like a full-blown addiction. I think when I first started using substances, it wasn't because I was drug seeking. It wasn't because I, wanted to be a drug addict or anything like that. It first started with when I was younger, seeing a psychiatrist. I also, I grew up in a great family and I was an athlete. And with sports and athleticism comes injuries oftentimes. And so I had some injuries. I fractured my shin, I fractured my ankle around this time. I also struggled with a little bit of mental health, some depression and anxiety, and having trouble focusing in school. And so I saw a psychiatrist for a couple different reasons, but one for helping me in school, being prescribed Adderall and other stimulants like that to help me focus. And then also as far as, the benzodiazepines and different medications to help alleviate pain for my injuries. And it wasn't until much later down the road I realized that this kind of was the start of me wanting substances, because I was able to see that when I wasn't feeling okay, whether it was mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, that I could take some sort of substance and feel much better. And so it's really difficult to kind of figure out when the actual SUD, the substance use disorder, came in, when the addiction started, if it started from the first time I used, or if it was just kind of this disease of wanting more and more. So I don't know the exact time that it did start, but like I said, it was throughout that process that it just kind of became more and more and more.
Thank you. And I know you mentioned this a little bit, but to dig a little deeper, what was your background with substances prior to the substance use disorder setting in? And then at what age exactly did you start using them?
Well, I think that the first part I answered that I was prescribed different medications. I think it was in my, mid to later teenage years. I don't know the exact age because it's been a while. But I think kind of that 14, 15, 16 was kind of that pivotal moment for me where, obviously there's the medical side of it. There's the medical component of being prescribed these medications, but there's also that component of when you're in middle school, high school, junior high, and you're wanting to fit in with other individuals and wanting to make friends, and you don't want to be the one that's left out. And I actually ended up switching high schools because my junior high split between two of the local high schools. And so most of my friends went to the other one. So after my first year of high school, I switched schools. And I think kind of just that feeling of not having people around you, or not feeling like you have your friends close to you, and again wanting to fit in, started to lead into that kind of peer pressure and hanging out with the wrong crowd, or starting to experiment with different substances because you want to feel a part of something, you want to be connected with people. So I would say, yeah, kind of around that 15, 16 age range.
Thank you. So these questions go around the stigma. And how do you think the stigma surrounding SUD impacted you in admitting you had a problem and asking for help? And to add on to that, do you think this stigma contributes to our SUD and overdose death epidemic?
Absolutely. So the whole idea of like a stigma is we grow up, and stigmas are often, we have stigmas for a couple reasons. One is because it's how we were raised. And so it was, brought onto us. One could be culture, one could be our own personal experiences. And so the way I was raised, like I said, I was raised in a wonderful home, great parents, great family. And so I didn't really have any experience about what SUD, what addiction was. The closest understanding I had, or that I thought I had, would be from watching movies or TV and thinking that, or driving through, I live in the Seattle area, driving through downtown Seattle and seeing people that were homeless, and almost having the stereotype in my head, or the stigma in my head, that, okay, homelessness, that's your fault. Homelessness, it leads to addiction, and it's all your fault, and it's your choice to become an addict and to use these addictive substances. And so when I started having problems, it was almost this like humbling feeling of saying, oh my gosh, I was wrong for all those years. How could someone that got great grades in school, was a very competitive athlete, that grew up in a great family, and a upper middle class, how could this be me? And it really changed my understanding of what SUD, what addiction, what mental health look like, to realize that it doesn't ever look like what we think it does. And it's still constantly changing. Or I meet new people and I say, oh my gosh, like, you have struggled with this. I would never have thought that from you. And so now a lot of what I do, I work for a drug and alcohol and co-occurring treatment facility, and I've worked with tons and tons of families and clients, and I've seen really all different spectrums and how it's affected people in all different ways. And it's been really eye-opening to understand that, the stigma out there really prevents people oftentimes from getting help, and from realizing or recognizing or even admitting that they have that problem, because they're afraid, that my friends won't like me, my family won't accept me, my employer won't hire, potential employer won't hire me. And then on the other side of that, family members often want to hide their loved ones, drug or alcohol problem, because they don't want their friends saying, oh my gosh, have you seen so and so's husband? He's an addict, or so and so's kids are using drugs and alcohol. They must not have raised them right. And so people think it's the family member's fault, or it's the individual's fault. And I think this is something that's ongoing, that without proper education, people really just don't understand.
Thank you. That's some very valuable information. And to add on to that, what do you think the youth and adults can do to help break down stigma with both SUD and recovery?
I think, as far as the stigma and breaking that down, I think getting more education around what it looks like. I think even more so as far, youth, young adults, where social media is huge, right? And so I think oftentimes we go towards social media for our sources, whether it's movie or whether it's, different social media platforms, TV shows. And I think historically, again, it's kind of like what I witnessed when I was young, is that we have this idea and this misconception in our head about what addiction looks like. And so I think if we had more modern resources for that, about what it looks like, having people tune in to other people that have, that are in recovery, that have been through it, that can share their own personal experience. And also not just the education side, but more of the understanding and the sympathy and the compassion side, where if you are struggling, don't be afraid to reach out for help. And, parents, teachers, whoever that young people look up to, being able to have those kind of conversations, that it's not, it doesn't mean that you're a criminal or a bad person. It just means that, we're here to help, and we want to have this conversation and talk with you. And yeah.
So what was your process of recovery? Was there a rock bottom point that drove you to seek help or motivated you otherwise?
So I love this question. Anytime I hear this all the time, people say the rock bottom. Oh, did you hit rock bottom? Did you hit rock bottom? I've always heard that your rock bottom is whenever you stop digging. Like you can if you put that shovel down, that could be your rock bottom. And in recovery, we talk about there's like high bottom and low bottom, meaning some people's bottoms look different than other people's. And someone may lose everything. They may lose a marriage, they may lose their house, they may lose their job, they may go bankrupt. And then some people may not lose all of that. They may have family members that are upset with them, or so everyone's bottom looks different. My bottom looks same as a lot of people's and different from some people. I had gone through treatment a couple times. I was pushed into treatment. There's three ways that I think people usually they go to treatment. There are three things, and they all start with the letter L. One is the law, so they get in legal trouble. They get a DUI or a possession charge, and so the courts or the legal system, says you can either go to jail or you can go to treatment, or your jail sentence can be lowered if you go to treatment or whatever. The other one is the liver. And what I mean by that is medical issues. So a doctor says, your liver enzymes are up, or you've been in the hospital, or you've overdosed. And so maybe that pushes someone to get help, as they say, I think medically this is causing a lot of issues. I should look into this. And they're concerned about their well-being. The other one is love. And so law, liver, and love. And so love meaning either you love yourself enough to realize that you need help, or you have family or support systems that love you enough to say, you know what, we're going to intervene and you need treatment. So mine was a little bit of a combination. The first time I went to treatment, I was young, I was 18, and I did outpatient treatment. Like any good person who's struggling with SUDs, we say, all I need is outpatient. I can keep doing what I'm doing and just do some outpatient. I stayed sober for a little bit, but I did not continue to follow up with what I was supposed to be doing, and eventually relapsed. I didn't do it wholeheartedly. I didn't put everything I had into it. I kind of just said like, oh, it's on the back burner. I'll do everything else the same in my life. And then I started going to treatment a couple more times, a couple inpatients, a couple outpatients. And this time around when I got sober, it's because I started getting into other trouble. I started hanging out with people that no 19-year-old girl should be hanging out with. I finally got sober when I was 19 years old. And, I just started hanging out with the wrong crowds, people that were very heavily into the legal system, very heavily kind of intimidating and scary people. And, eventually I had to drop out of school. I couldn't hold a job. My family was very upset with me. They were very concerned. They were extremely worried. All of my friends were worried about me. And, I was fortunate that I was at such young of an age that I didn't have a house. I didn't have tons of outstanding like credit card bills. I didn't have a marriage that I destroyed. So there's a lot of things that I did not have to go through because I did get sober so young, which is not always the case for people that young. But I think it was just a combination of these different things where this time around, I said, you know what, I'm done for now. I never once said when I went to treatment, I always had said, I'll go to treatment for 2 weeks to get everybody off my back, is kind of how it ended up. I did not say, I'm going to stay sober for the rest of my life. And sometimes I think that that's all you need. Oftentimes people say that this person needs to be 100% willing and committed and they have to want treatment on their own. I don't believe that completely. I think that if someone has a little bit of willingness to go get some help, then in treatment, it's the treatment center's job to help provide these tools, provide these skills where these individuals and clients start feeling better in their lives. They start getting tools and skills and working on relationships with family members and getting help for what other mental health or co-occurring disorders that they do have. And then from there, starting to build on this life for themselves where they feel that they don't ever need to go back to the use of drugs or alcohol. So I think, my bottom was just, I decided to stop digging that hole right then. And, my life started to get better and better. I don't know if there's ever one defining moment in anyone's recovery that they just say, this one moment, I'm staying sober the rest of my life. It's kind of a combination of things and feeling sick and tired and just feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders and wanting to do something different in that day.
Thank you. And this is really related to the previous question. It's what have you learned about yourself from being in your recovery programs?
I've learned a lot. I've learned, growing up, like I said, I was a great kid. I was very determined. I was very motivated. I was very persistent. I worked really hard to get the grades that I did. I worked very hard in my sports. I trained. I would play. I was a soccer player. I would do high school soccer. And then afterwards I would go to my premier team. I would travel. And so whatever I did, I put my 100% into, and I've always been that way. And it, on the flip side, it kind of worked to my disadvantage in my addiction because I did whatever I do in my life 100%. And so I took those same characteristics into my addiction. And so getting sober and coming into recovery, I got to flip it back and say, okay, whatever I do, I put my all into. And I've always been someone that's been very compassionate. I've always cared a lot about other people. Even in my addiction, one of the symptoms or something that people often say is that people that are struggling with addiction, they don't care about anybody else. And I did, I think a lot of my actions may not show that, because people will say, if you truly cared about your family, you would have just stopped using. But I did. My family wouldn't see me for months at a time because in my head, I didn't want them seeing how horrible I looked. And so maybe that wasn't the right way to go around it, but that's the way in my head, because I cared, and I tried to put them first, even though, it was misconstrued. But so in my recovery today, I put everything into it. I use my voice, I use my story. I've had the opportunity to work for the same treatment facility for the last 5 years. And so I put everything into that, being able to share my story, help other clients that are going through the same thing that I've gone through. And I've learned a lot in my recovery about, not just ways that I can help other people, but also, getting that voice to share it with others. And, I think it's been an extremely rewarding time because I've got to go back to who I was growing up and use the same same skill set to help other people today in different ways.
So, going off a little bit about like family, what role did your family play in your recovery? And how do you think other families should be involved in the recovery of their loved ones?
So addiction is a family disease. We always say that addiction, substance use disorder, mental health, it's never just the person that's using the substances that's the only one that's struggling. And, what I've realized throughout my recovery, and especially in the early stages, is, obviously I was impacted by my addiction, but throughout that time, a lot of that I was numb. I had no sense of reality. I did not oftentimes know what day it was, what I was going to do the next day. My family went through it, just as hard, if not harder in some ways, because they did not get to numb out through that time. They weren't the ones using these substances to feel better. So they were hit with all of these emotions throughout that entire process. And so getting into recovery and getting sober, and this is something that I share with family members of clients of ours, or family members of clients in other treatment centers, as I do a lot of work with the families, is that if your loved one goes to treatment, or if your loved one gets into recovery without treatment, if the family doesn't get help, whether it's support groups, whether it's therapy, whether it's talking with other family members of if they're friends that maybe their loved one has also, gotten sober, is that this person, that once they come out of treatment, or they're in early recovery and they try to build this relationship back with their family's still going to feel that they're walking on eggshells, and their family's going to take a step back, and they're going to have trust issues, and they're going to have a lot of these issues that they maybe won't look at their loved one in the same way. And it's going to take a lot of time, regardless, to work on this relationship. But throughout this time, my family has been a huge support system. They went to family support. They went to, we had like family sessions and family program at the treatment center that I went through. And it was extremely important. It was extremely beneficial for them to do that, because we got to have group therapy sessions, and then they got to learn a lot about, addiction and why I was doing the things that I was doing. So they have a new understanding of it all. So I think that the family support throughout someone's entire recovery process is extremely important, not only for their loved one, but also for themselves, so they can begin the healing process.
Thank you. And connecting back on a couple of points we touched earlier, having experienced substance use disorder as a young person, what advice do you have for today's youth and teens about the misuse of prescription medication as well as other drugs?
Obviously I'm not a doctor, so I do believe that, there's prescription drugs out there that are beneficial. I do think that what's most important is having those conversations, talking to your doctor, talking to your psychiatrist about side effects, or about what they do, or about, potential risk factors. But I also think normalizing the conversation about substance use disorder is extremely important, and not normalizing substance use disorder, but normalizing the conversation around it. And so starting as a youth, starting, 10, 11, 12, however old, having these conversations, having people that you do trust, whether it's a parent, a teacher, a school counselor, a family member, an older brother, older sister, grandparent, whoever it is. But I urge it to be someone that is older, or older than you, and having that person that you trust, that you can talk to them about what you're going through. Oftentimes the signs and symptoms of, using drugs or substance use disorder, or a potential substance use disorder in the future, may not even be that someone's starting to use drugs. Oftentimes it can start, like I look back at my childhood, I had a great childhood, but I think that, there could have been a couple things that went into this. Maybe it was because I switched schools. Maybe it was because I had injuries playing sports. Maybe it was because in some sports I wasn't as good as other people, and so it really hurt my self-esteem. It could have been, I had friends that were great singers and I couldn't sing, and so I didn't feel as good as them. So there's just a couple things, there's a lot of things really from childhood that I could look back on. And it's just things that make us not feel as worthy, or things that make us not feel as connected to other people, or things that make us feel down about ourselves. So a lot of these things I think can go into it. And although during those times I wasn't using any substances, I think once I found the substances, they were that much more helpful. And that's when it kind of kicked in, as saying, wow, if I don't feel good about myself, I can use something else to feel better. So I think looking and being very mindful about these different moments when we're younger, and talking to these people that you trust. If you're 12 years old or 10 years old and you had a bad day at school, maybe it was you were bullied, or you were picked on, or you lost one of your friends, or whatever it may be, having people that you can go home after school and talk to these people that you trust about this, and then having them be mindful and watch these different things and be there to support, rather than feeling that you can't go to anybody and that you're all alone.
Thank you. So this connects to the previous question. What advice do you have for the youth who have friends who may be misusing prescription medicines or other drugs?
Yep, great question after that. So again, I think having that person that you trust, being able to go to that person, because when you're young, oftentimes you don't know what advice to give. You want to be there for them, but you don't want to get in trouble for hanging out with them, or you don't want your family to not whatever it may be. Having that person, that adult that you can go and talk to, again, whether it's at school and it's a teacher, you just go up to your teacher after one of the classes and just say, hey, so and so, I've heard that they might be struggling. It's not to get them in trouble, but it's just because you care and you want to help them. And it's not, again, I think the stigma around people that are using substances, or the substance use disorder, as being bad people, or that they're going to get in trouble, that's the kind of conversations we need to have. Because if we can stop this early or get ahead of it, that's when it really shows that we care. It's not that we're trying to get people in trouble for it. It's that we care and we don't want them to go down a dark path. So I think definitely being open and talking to them, talking to an adult that you trust would help in that situation.
And building a little bit off of that, what advice do you have for how to deal with anxiety and stress without using potentially dangerous and addictive medications?
I think with stress and anxiety, many times as adolescents and as adults, really, we're going to feel that. I do believe in therapy. I do believe in seeing professionals for that kind of stuff. As far as different coping mechanisms and more of like a holistic thing you can do, I am really big into meditation, journaling, reading, things like that, where you can write them down and not be so in your head. And I think that's where it really kicks in, is this anxiety we don't know how to cope with. And if we don't tell somebody about it, because maybe we feel that, oh, they're going to shame us, or I don't like to get vulnerable and talk about myself. But if we can talk about it, or journal, meditate, figure out why we're feeling with these things, then that's how we can start to move forward through it. But I really do think that, seeing a therapist, seeing a school counselor, every school I've ever seen or gone to, they've always had school counselors there, and just asking to go talk with them, I think is a really good time to do that. And that often turns into the adult that you do trust, because you build that relationship with them.
So, do you mind sharing us what work you do now to help make a difference with our overdose epidemic?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So for the last 5 years, I have been working for a treatment facility called Hotel California by the Sea. We started in Southern California, and we have since opened locations in Seattle and in Bellevue, Washington, near Seattle, and Cincinnati, Ohio, and St. Louis, Missouri. So we help men, women, and young adults struggling with addiction and co-occurring disorders. I also, since, I do a lot of work with our treatment center and working through potential barriers for people to receive treatment. But I've also done a lot of speaking engagements and gone to schools, talking to therapists, and really try to put myself out there and to kind of have this experience where I'm getting to share my story with other people, because I still sometimes believe that maybe this is my purpose for getting through addiction. Not everybody is so fortunate, as I was, to get sober and recover and go through this whole recovery journey and start getting healthy. So I really think that that's my purpose, is to help other people. I've done a lot of speaking engagements. I've done a lot of traveling to share my story. And, I'm always available for people. I get a lot of calls from my family's friends, or from, people that I know, their friends or their family, that just want to talk through this process of how do we intervene on our loved one? What's the intervention process look like? What are these different levels of care of treatment? What do you suggest? What should we do with them? Where's a place that I think would be the best fit for my loved one based off of these, issues that they're struggling most with? And just be able to be a resource for people, because I've worked in this industry for a long time, and I know a lot of different resources that I'm happy to help make it a lot easier on each family member, because I know it's always a crisis moment. And when you're struggling and you're close to someone that is really struggling in the depths of addiction or alcohol use, then your life gets turned upside down, and it's hard. And even picking up that first phone call can be extremely difficult. So I want to make it as easy as possible. I'll help do a lot of the legwork, and we'll just, help take a lot of the stress off of you, because I know it's a very stressful time for everybody.
And our last question today is, what do you think others can do to make a difference with America's substance use disorder and overdose epidemic?
There's a lot of things. I think definitely that the education. I am someone that believes in, if you are using substances, I know, at least in Washington State and up here, we have like the Good Samaritan laws. So if you are using with somebody, although we don't condone using, but that you use, if you're in the depths of your addiction, that you do use with somebody else. I think the overdose deaths, when someone that's using is using with somebody else in the room, if they do overdose, that person is able to call the police or call the paramedics and get you revived, always carrying Narcan. But as far as the education and prevention, and what people can do, I think, doing their research, attending speaking events, listening into, your guys' videos, and doing everything that they can to hear not only, what the internet tells them, but hearing from reliable sources, hearing from people that have been through it, hearing from people that have struggled, that currently are struggling, keeping our eyes and ears open, and always just trying to help everybody in every way that we can.
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and pop back in here. What a great wealth of information you've shared. I can't thank you enough for the time you've spent with us today. And just reflecting on what you've shared, I just have to believe that your life has gone down a completely different path from what you expected it might when you were a teenager, right?
Absolutely.
You probably would never dream that you'd be working at a treatment facility. You would be helping people every single day to, move away from their addiction and get into a safe place. Is there anything else you can think of that you would want to share that we didn't ask a question to stimulate?
I'm not sure. I think, something that I've been working on a lot lately is obviously not just the stigma around addiction and overdose and mental health, but also there's sometimes a stigma around treatment and about getting sober in general. That sometimes I've worked with thousands of people and their families, that sometimes there's a stigma around getting sober, where they say, if I get sober, my life's going to be boring. Or if I go to treatment, that means I'm going to rehab. And that means, you know, all those songs about going to rehab and that I'm just a bad person. And, you know, I've had probably the most fun in my life in sobriety, which when I was actively in my addiction, I would have told you that that would never happen, because I thought, how could you, you know, get through life without using anything? I truly didn't think it was possible when I was in the depths of my addiction. And so getting sober, I mean, when I laugh, it's like true, authentic belly laughs, you know, where it's like, it's not just because of a substance I'm using, or we talk about alcohol being, you know, giving this liquid courage. And so when I'm laughing, when I'm with friends, obviously pre-COVID, but you know, it's like authentic. And I build these friendships in my life where it's not because they need something from me. It's not because they want something from me, or it's, you know, my relationships, my friendships today are reciprocal. You know, we help each other out. We're kind, we're caring, we're compassionate, we're understanding. And I met some of my best friends ever, you know, in my recovery program. You know, I like to stick around people that are also working on themselves, because that was my past, or that's, you know, was my issue in the past with getting little stints of sobriety, is I would get, you know, a month sober, and then I would start hanging out with my drug friends again, you know, my drug friends. And how could I expect to stay sober if I'm around these people that are using, right? You stick around a barbershop too long, you're going to get your hair cut. And so I like to stick with other people that are doing well, that are going on the same recovery journey. But I think it's important just to understand that getting sober doesn't mean your life has to get boring. It actually means that you can start your life and do whatever you want in your life, because you have the ability to do so. And that going to treatment doesn't have to be this horrible thing. It can be this thing that really gives you your life back.
Mhm.
And I tell people this all the time. I truly would love to go back to treatment at our program. I went to our program, Sandy's Place, which was a women's program in Southern California. And I learned so much about myself that wasn't even drug or alcohol related. It was how I show up in relationships, how I communicate with others, how to improve my self-esteem, how to meditate, how to work on my anxiety, all these different things that I would have never learned if I just tried to get sober on my own. And maybe I could have gotten sober on my own, but I think I'd be back in my addiction because I didn't have all these tools. So I really do think getting help, putting yourself first, you know, treatment can be this opportunity where it's showing yourself that you love yourself and that you deserve this. And, you know, it's not a punishment.
Oh, great. I just admire you so much. I'm so happy that you are where you are. And thank you for making a difference as you do every single day. It matters. So thank you very, very much. I'm going to share contact information for NCAPDA. So if anyone has a question, needs resources, this is how you contact us. Please check out our YouTube channel for even more videos. And then again, please hang in just a little bit longer and you can see a list of other resources that we encourage you to use. So thank you, youth interns from NCAPDA, for the excellent job you did today. Really appreciate your time and effort. And again, thank you, Allie. Really appreciate your time with us.
Thank you.